By now you might know that we're rebuilding not one but two 1984 Yamaha IT490s. One for me and one for my mate Jason. We did a full recap in our last video in this series if you want to go back and check it out. Or if you're super keen, you can go back to episode 1 and see how bright-eyed and bushy-tailed I was. If you watched the last episode, you'll have seen how our friend John Hand brought back our rotten frame to life and got our project back on track. A few things have happened since then, but now we're back at John Hand's again to tie up a few loose ends, which will all be revealed. Also, stick around to the end of the video to see a couple of cool projects he's got on the go in the workshop. Jason's suspension has now been taken apart by Damien, our suspension guy. He said the forks looked like they'd never had their oil changed in 40 years, and the shock had some sort of welded on nut holding the damping together. Jason has now sourced a new shock on eBay. Oh, and you may have also seen a Footnam James logo at the start of the video too. They've come on board as a sponsor for the project to help us out. Thanks Footnam James, and also thanks to everyone else who's supporting us on this project. It really means a lot to us. Before we head over to John's, here's a few short updates from my workshop. Here's all these brake plates. These were the really bad ones. If you can remember, Jason had a set of good ones and I managed to find a set of really nice ones on eBay. That's from America, that's from UK. There's all the parts that came from it. They'll get put aside, and these are going to get sent to Central Wheel and they're going to Cerakote those and turn out really nice. Thought we may as well just weigh the frame while we're at it. So this is Jason's frame, non-Oceana spec frame, and let's see what this came in at. 10.55 kgs. So I thought this was interesting. Now this is mine with all the modifications, so the extra sleeve in the back there. Mine's got an extra bracket there for a battery box. Also a horn mount, probably a few other things I don't know. Oh, and John Hand did these little skid plates under here, so that adds some weight to this frame. So check this out. This one's only coming in at 1071. So there's very little in that. Also, what you didn't see is I just dropped the frame, so I mounted it up here and that broke. So, all right, we're here at John Hand's again. Had a bit of an issue. Got home and I offered this up, back mudguard, and the mounts were a touch out. I think it was about 2 mil, John said, but this mount here didn't line up and that one there didn't line up. So what we did is I measured from here to there on mine, and then this is Jason's, and I measured from there to there, and it was 2 or 3 mil out. So I called John and I told him, he said bring it back in, and so here's John to tell us what he did.
Well, what I done, obviously he brought Jason's back again, so I made a real quick, simple, not very nice jig at all really, but it does the job, that picks up all of the mounting points, the airbox bracket here, these 2 brackets there, so I can then transfer it over to your frame, which obviously that airbox bracket and these 2 brackets are in the correct place because they haven't been touched at all. I then removed this strap so I could reposition it using the jig. That wasn't too much of an issue at all. I did notice that the thread had gone in the nut there, so replace that nut. And the rear loop on the mudguard, the holes were about 2 to 3 millimeters too far back. Luckily, where I'd sleeved this tube, I removed all of the brass from the sleeve, which was, there was probably a 5 or 6 mil gap there, so I could run the brass in. So ground all that out, back down to the sleeve, so there's not a lot holding it on. Give it a bit of a warm up on both sides, and just tapped this whole loop back or forward. So you tap that, and because you heat it, it softens the brass and allows you, doesn't it? That's right, yeah. So obviously brought that back 2 or 3 mil, got it lined up perfectly with the jig. Just tack this back in place while I remove the jig, just to make sure the mudguard fits in there right. It did, so braze it up again and clean the brass back, so once it's powder coated you would never know.
A few other little things that you did on there as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, I did notice that obviously I come across this thread being stripped out, so I should have checked when I had it last week or week before, whenever it was, but there were quite a few of them. They weren't stripped right out, but if you were to put a bolt in there, do it up, undo it a couple times, probably wouldn't last that long. So while I was there, I removed those captive nuts and brazed some more on. So those two I done there. I done this one here, and there was one down here on the inside of like that rubber mount for the airbox.
Yep, see that?
Yeah.
There was one other thing that you had to do, was that.
Yeah, that, I don't know whether that had broke or whether somebody had cut through it, but I chucked a bit of MIG on there and cleaned it back up.
Yeah, and there was another thing.
You had a couple of holes in your headstock.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Where a plate had been put on, which
Yeah.
was incorrect.
Smooth that all off.
Yeah, you'd never know now.
No, looks good. What else, mate?
I think that was it. You should be ready to rock now.
All right, quickly show us how that jig goes in, mate.
There is a specific way this jig goes in. I was saying to Alex earlier that jig making, it's quite easy to make a jig. As you can see, this is not a very nice jig at all, but it does the job. But what you've always got to bear in mind when making a jig is, obviously when you make it, all of the bits are just bits. It's a single bit of tube there, single bit of tube there. So you can make anything. You could make a lovely, elaborate jig, but then never get it back out. So that, yeah, that's something that you've always got to bear in mind. So that is the jig in position.
So in summary, if we jig this up and then we stick it in that one,
it's got to be.
We can make sure that's going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
As that one.
Yes, right.
All right, just because he's got it on the bench, have a look at these. A couple of Matisse frames. Do we call Rickman Matisse frames or Matisse?
I call them Matisse.
Okay, so technically Matisse frames.
They are. It is a Rickman Matisse.
But you call them Matisse?
Yes.
Okay.
Mainly because the chap that owns the name Rickman,
yeah,
wouldn't like me calling it a Rickman.
Okay, so for the record, let's call them Matisses. What state are these at, mate?
These are fully welded out of the main jig.
Yep.
So they obviously go in the jig in component form, so just a single tube,
like we saw last time in the last video.
Yeah. All the cross tubes go in and are held in position. As much welding as I can do as possible in the jig to stop it moving. They come out of the jig then to weld everything else up. Then they go back in the jig again to have the swinging arm plates put in.
Is that those round? Oh no, those things.
Yeah.
These things, yeah.
That's it. And the damper brackets. Once I've got enough weld on those, I can take it back out and finish brazing.
Yep.
So this one I've welded. This one is just out of the jig, tacked in position.
Okay, so let's have a look. So you tack that up, make sure it's straight.
Yeah.
And then goes to that.
Welded, yeah.
And they've also got a very interesting way of adjusting the chain, haven't they? Show us that quick.
That's right. They've got, so instead of adjusting on the swinging arm where the wheel is, it adjusts on the swinging arm pivot. So
Up the front near the engine.
Yes. You have a selection of 10 chain adjusters with all different offset holes. So a number 1 is centre, and number 5 is off centre.
Yep. Number 10 is the opposite.
That's right, all the way. It's very good for being precise. If you put a number 5 in the left hand side and number 5 in the right hand side, it can't be wrong. It's just a ball ache. Instead of you know, adjusting your chain on the rear swinging arm at the spindle, that's quick. It's quick and easy. This is not quick and easy. And for like a scrambles bike, you want it to be quick.
We're in the field.
Yeah, like you come in, you know, into the pits and you've got another race and you got, you know, adjust your chain. You don't really want to be undoing your two nuts off your swinging arm pivot bolt and taking the washers off, taking those out, replacing them with different number. It's a really good idea, and it was probably sort of ahead of its time at the time, but things have moved on and there's much better ways of adjusting your chain now.
All right, let's have a look at this sidecar over here, mate. Wasp, is it?
Yeah, that's it. This is an original RT17 Wasp sidecar outfit.
What year?
It had been 70s, 1970s. For a Norton engine.
What Norton engine?
Would have been like a Commando, so 650.
651, yeah.
Yeah. Lovely bit of kit. Built beautifully. And
that's a lot of weight to carry around, isn't it? All that metal.
And two blokes jumping around on it. Yeah. And you know they're ridden hard. They do fair sized jumps, and it goes to show the quality of you know Wasp sidecars. They're still going, you know, still being raced today after all those years.
Mate, just show us quickly the difference between these two. The nickel one here.
Yeah.
And I know we're sort of jumping all around the place, but
you can edit that, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the difference between these two.
Yeah. So this swinging arm here is a standard Matisse swinging arm. Obviously, no adjustment on the wheel end because it's all done on the swinging arm pivot on the frame. That is how they were. Nothing wrong with it really. But as people sort of, I don't know, modernise, if I would say, that is another version.
This is your version?
My own version.
Yeah. What's different?
So the frame, you could still fit it into your standard frame with your swinging arm adjustment done on your swinging arm pivot point. Mm-hmm. If I sell one of these to a customer and obviously they're going to put it in a Matisse, so you still got the slot in the swinging arm pivot, I normally supply them with a number 5 or a number 10 adjuster, so they can put their swinging arm as far forward as possible.
Yep.
Because ideally you want to get your sprocket as close to the pivot as possible. So
why is that?
It helps for drive, and also helps your chain run. The further this is away from your sprocket, the more likely you are to get slap on the chain.
Oh.
So this adjusts from the wheel end. I machine up some aluminium bosses, mm-hmm. so the wheel spindle goes through.
A little bit longer yours as well, isn't it?
That's right. People say these originals are a bit short, so mine is about an inch longer. And you've got quite a lot more adjustment here than you have on the swinging arm pivot point on the Matisses.
You do. What you got? 10mm adjustment on the Matisse? What do you reckon?
Yeah, maybe 15.
This bit.
It would be about 15 to 16 millimetres of adjustment. Mm-hmm. You'd have about 25 millimetres of adjustment.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to run it even longer, you know, you could run a slightly longer chain and run the adjustment right at the back of the swinging arm, or bring it right forward, so then you've got your extra inch. Mm-hmm. So if you were to run it right at the back, then you'd be getting on for 2 inches longer. But the shock mounts are in the same position as standard. If I'd have moved them down with the end, you'd have to run longer shocks, which probably wouldn't be allowed in pre-65.
All right, John, mate, cheers for fixing that up.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Any final words?
I don't think so. Good luck with it all. I look forward to seeing you. What's your finishing man's name?
Keith.
Keith. I look forward to seeing his job and what he does.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've seen his other IT that he done, which I thought looked bloody good.
I'll cut some shots in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good luck with it all.
Good on you, mate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.